I've made loads of cheesecakes over the year and I want to share some of the things that I've learned with you, and it's only going to take 5 minutes, but I promise you your cheesecakes will be better if you take on these tips. Tip number 1 is to make sure that you buy full fat ingredients. This is really important because it's to do with the fat content and the water content. So make sure that you're buying full fat ingredients. Number 2, this is a personal recommendation, but in England we have lots of different kinds of cream cheese, and in America you have blocks of cream cheese. That's not a thing that we have here, but we do have ones that come in a tub, and the best brand as far as I'm concerned is Philadelphia. This is not, like, I'm not being endorsed, this is my personal opinion. The very best cream cheese for a cheesecake is Philadelphia full fat. Check the size of the packages, shrinkflation is real, they have made them smaller, but honestly it's the best ones. So buy them on offer. They actually have quite a long shelf life. You should be able to get 3 months, so buy them when they're on offer, keep them in the fridge if you think you're going to make a cheesecake. A lot of recipes are going to call for sour cream, and there is nothing wrong with using that, but my preference is actually Greek yogurt. So you can do a straight swap from sour cream to Greek yogurt. Greek yogurt is actually lower in fat, even when you're using full fat, so it's a great healthy swap. And also you can use quark. And I love using quark because I have an issue with lactose, so I prefer less lactose, and quark falls into that category. It's also higher in protein and lower in fat. So if you're trying to make a healthy swap, you want to do something in this recipe that's a bit healthier, that is a swap that you can make, and it's just 1 for 1. Another tip is to make sure that all of your ingredients are at room temperature before you start baking. For the base, you've got lots of choices. My 3 favourite are digestive, which is basically a graham cracker in America, a hobnob, which is an oat-based biscuit, and a ginger snap. And coincidentally, a ginger snap is actually the healthiest of those 3 choices. Not that a cheesecake is healthy, but if you want to make a small healthy swap, you can do that. Another thing that I definitely recommend that you do when you're making your recipe is that you weigh your ingredients. Some people will use cups as a measurement, and there is nothing wrong with that, but you are measuring by volume, and if you want to be really accurate and reduce your chances of messing it up, then weigh your ingredients, and especially weigh your eggs. A lot of recipes are going to call for large eggs or extra large eggs, and those do weigh more. There is more volume in the egg. Most of my recipes call for medium because that's what I buy, and a medium egg is usually about 50 grams. So if I make a recipe and I say you're going to need 4 eggs, what I mean is by weight, you want about 200 grams of eggs. You'll just crack your egg, weigh it, that's how you know how much your eggs weigh. You don't need to use any equipment when you make a baked cheesecake. You can absolutely make this with a large bowl and a spatula. You could also, if you want to use a machine to make it quicker, use a food processor or a mixer. My preference is actually to use a food processor because I find that the blade introduces less air than a balloon whisk, but it is up to you. If you do add quite a lot of air, then you'll find that before you transfer it to your tin, you might find it useful to just bang the mixture on the counter a few times so those large air bubbles come to the top and they can disappear. I use a spring form or a loose bottom pan. You can wrap some foil around it if you think maybe you need to. If you want to test how watertight the tin is, you can just add some water before you use it, see what happens with the water, and then make your decision about whether or not you want to add foil to the bottom. The final piece of advice before you start baking is to line your tin. You can line all of it the whole way around like I do, or you can just line the bottom and then use butter and really well grease the outside. You want to make sure it goes all the way up to the top. So all the way to the top of your tin, use your butter, make sure it's really well done. When it comes to baking, you'll want to check the temperature of your oven. If you have an oven thermometer, then test it out, see whether or not it runs the temperature. My personal advice, especially for beginners, is to cook long and low. Long and low means you don't need to use a water bath, it just means you cook it for longer and on a much lower temperature. I just find you get much more consistent results when you do that. So I always start mine at a much higher temperature than I'm going to end up with. So 160 or 180 degrees Celsius, and then I'll lower it by 40 degrees and I'll keep it on for much longer. So I usually do about 15 minutes at 180 and then I'll do an hour at 140. And the most important thing is don't open the door. Don't open the oven door. If you do, you're going to change the temperature really rapidly, and that is more likely to lead to sinking and cracking. You'll want to cook your cheesecake in the center or the bottom of your oven. If you cook it at the top, it might get too warm. And another thing is I like to introduce a little bit of steam because I just think I get more consistent results that way. So I add a little ramekin, just a small ramekin of water, and that's going to help steam up the oven. because you don't want to be changing the temperature too much if you can, and that steam helps it remain a bit consistent. The way you're going to know that your cheesecake is done is because it's still going to be a little bit wobbly. Cheesecakes puff up and then they will become wobbly when they're mostly cooked. And it's at the point when they're mostly cooked that you want to turn off the oven and leave the door closed. My method, and I'm going to show you this video at the end, is 15 minutes at 180, 40 minutes at 140. I don't open the oven. And when it's done, I switch the oven off and I leave it for 30 minutes and I still don't open the oven. The final thing to say about your cheesecake is that cheesecakes develop flavour over time. So don't bake your cheesecake on the day that you want to eat it. In an ideal world, you're going to make your cheesecake the night before, give it 12 or 24 hours and then eat it. But if you're making it in the morning and you can give it at least 6 hours, you'll find it tastes much better. But I definitely find it's better overnight. That's the end of it for my tips and tricks. I really hope that you found this helpful. Thank you so much for watching to this point in the video. I am going to add in some extra footage of me making this cheesecake. If you want to see it, I'll show you exactly how I made it and the tips and tricks in play. But if not, I appreciate you getting to this point. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like and subscribe. This recipe is really easy and perfect for beginners, and the first thing you want to do is take all of your ingredients out and allow them to come to room temperature. The next thing that you want to do is pop all of your biscuits into a blender or a food processor and blitz them until you've got crumbs, and then pour that into a large bowl. I've melted my butter already, and I'm going to add most but not all of my butter, and that's because what I'm looking for is the texture of wet sand, and it's easier to add a little bit more butter if you need it, but if you add too much it's going to be oily and really slick, and it's not going to be very pleasant to eat, and you're also going to get an oily mess at the bottom of your pan. So only add as much butter as you need and just reserve the rest if you don't need it. Don't forget to push this mixture down really well. You can use a spoon or a glass. The bottom of a glass does work really well, or a spoon. You want to make it really firm in the bottom. And then I have a preheated oven that I'm going to pop this into, and I'm only going to put it in for about 8 or 10 minutes just for it to firm up, and then you take it out and allow it to cool on the side. I'm using a food processor for this, but you could use a large bowl and a spoon, a spatula. You can use an electric hand whisk, or you can use a stand mixer, but you just want to be careful that you don't use a high level of power. My food processor only has 3 settings, and I use the first setting, which is the lowest one, and I add my cream cheese first and I give it a quick blitz. It's really soft anyway because it's been at room temperature, which is really important, but I give it a quick blitz and then I add my sugar slowly and I just let it mix. It is really important that whatever you're using, you scrape down the sides, because that's going to give you the most even distribution of ingredients. And so I'm adding everything really slowly and using the slow power setting so I don't overmix this. I'm adding Greek yogurt. This is also at room temperature. You don't want to shock the cream cheese and make it cool down and become really cold. So I'm using full fat Greek yogurt. I've also added some corn flour and I've also added some salt, and I'm going to blitz this. I don't mix this for very long. I usually mix in maybe 5 or 10 second intervals, then turn it off and scrape it down. There's not much left to do now, so I'm going to add my room temperature eggs. I'm using the spatula just to incorporate them into the mixture a little bit more, because the blade on a food processor is near the bottom, so I just think that makes it a bit easier. I will put the mixture on for about 5 seconds, scrape it down another 5 seconds, and then I'm ready to move on to the flavouring. I'm flavouring this with lemon and lime, but obviously this is a basic cheesecake, so you could put any flavouring in that you want. But if you were looking for something natural, then the zest of a lemon and a lime works really well. I use unwaxed, but if you can't get those, you can always just use a regular one. And then I'm going to do the juice of half of a lime as well. Don't forget to scrape down the bowl, put it on to mix, and then you're ready to pour it into your lined tin. If you notice any large air bubbles once you've mixed it, which is especially likely if you have used a balloon whisk in your mixer, then tap the mixture onto the countertop just a few times, and what will happen is the larger air bubbles will go from the middle of the mixture to the top, and you can just pop those. If you tap it a few more times, they'll probably just pop themselves, and then you can pour it into your lined tin. Your base should be cool at this point, so you shouldn't have any problems. If you have an oven that's very noticeably hot, then you'll want to just lower the temperature just to err on the side of caution. I took these pictures on my phone and they were just when it came out of the oven, but as you can see, it's still slightly puffy on the top because it hasn't hit the cool air really yet. And so once it hits the cool air, it will deflate a little bit. And this is a bit more difficult to see, I will admit that. But I was tapping the side of the cheesecake and you could see that there is just a slight wobble. If you overcook your cheesecake, it is much more likely to crack and the texture just won't be the same. So this is the next day. I'm taking the paper off and I'm putting onto a serving board, and I used something to help me because obviously I have a slightly oddly shaped tin. It's my favourite cheesecake tin for some reason, and it is up to you how you decorate it. You can use frozen fruit or fresh fruit, or you could drizzle it with some sauce like some toffee or a chocolate sauce. Depends on what you decided to go with for your flavour profile, but this is a really versatile basic recipe. Once you've mastered this, you can make any flavour cheesecake you like. It has a really light, soft texture. It's on the lighter side for a baked cheesecake because it hasn't got sour cream in it. It's got Greek yogurt, which does make it lighter, but I think that this is the perfect recipe for you to perfect.